What's up, everyone? Welcome to the Mission Z Empowering Change podcast, brought to you by our sponsors, Long Island Prevention and Resilience Enrichment Program for drug abuse prevention and mental health awareness. Check out all of our programs and find out how our 3 pillars of action will help the students, parents, and professionals in your community face down the ongoing drug overdose and mental health crisis ravaging our communities by going to www.longislandprep.org and our Prep Academy for educator professional development and parent workshops. Our new digital courses delve into the ongoing issues our kids face today, including mental health awareness and drug abuse prevention strategies for teachers in the classroom and parents at home. Teachers can earn credits, or parents can simply take a course to learn how to tackle these issues head on and help their kids along the way. Learn more by going to www.theprepacademy.org today. And Pioneer Sports, who want you to stop doing it yourself. They help schools, camps, and municipalities start, run, and grow a successful sports program. You can check them out at playpioneersports.com. Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Mission Z Empowering Change podcast, brought to you by our sponsors, Long Island Prevention and Resilience Enrichment Program, and of course, Prep National for drug abuse prevention and mental health awareness. You can check out all of our programs by going to longislandprep.com as well as prepnational.com. We are here today joined by Dr. Samantha Harte. She has a great story to tell. She's involved with a lot of cool things with substance abuse and addiction and mental health, which is obviously what we're trying to do here, raise awareness for these issues. Samantha has a lengthy, fantastic resume. Let me just bring her on first, and then we'll talk about it, all right? Hello, Dr. Harte. Samantha, how you doing today?
Hey, I'm great. I'm very honored to be here. I cannot wait to talk.
It's an honor to have you. I always try to find people who are in the space, kind of doing the things we're doing here with Long Island Prep and Prep National. We've got a lot of things going on. So why don't you start? Tell us a little bit about you, what you're doing these days, what kind of brought you to the podcast, and how we can, kind of get this conversation going.
Oh, where do I start? Well, let's start with the fact that on February 28th this year, I turned 16 years sober.
Wow, congratulations. That's awesome. I love to hear
Thank
that.
you.
Love it.
Yeah, and I like to qualify first because it's different to be in the addiction, recovery, and mental health space as a professional
Mhm,
versus being an addict yourself and having
mhm.
literally lived through some of the hardest things. And
Right.
I'm both. So for
Mhm,
whoever's listening, it's important that you know, not just that I'm someone who's been overcoming addiction for many, many years, but trying my very best to live an emotionally sober life to the point where now I am taking these 12 steps that have been in the recovery rooms for almost 100 years and trying to bring them to the entire world, not just to addicts, in a more modern and trauma-informed way to cast the widest net on who I can help.
mhm,
And one of the ways that I'm trying to do that is by writing a book about it. And my book came
mhm.
out last year, and it's called Breaking the Circuit: How to Rewire Your Mind for Hope, Resilience, and Joy in the Face of Trauma. I didn't want to title the book about addiction specifically
Mhm.
or as an ode to the 12 steps, but I quote them and reference them again and again. The book is actually broken up into 12 chapters so that each one corresponds with one of the steps. In my story, I was one of those quote unquote high bottoms. And I love how we say that. Only an addict would say, I was so high functioning at the end that I had all the things external to me that culture tells us we should go out and get to be happy. But on the inside, I was dying.
Mhm.
How that's any form of high bottom, I'm not sure. But if you want to play that game, I was that girl coming into recovery. So I knew I had a cocaine problem and an alcohol problem, but I was sure that was it. I did not have a life problem. I did not have a problem getting a job or a boyfriend or being in shape or checking off all the boxes on my to-do list. And so 5 years of sobriety, I was running on perfectionism. I was running on my ability to control the world around me. Not only because it worked so well, but because it was what I did as a young girl in a very unstable home that kept me safe. And these
Mhm.
were things that I didn't understand in early recovery that the 12 steps were butting up against.
Mhm.
So the idea of just getting down with a God that I was told doesn't exist and relying on it to not just get sober, but to stay sober, when I was told the only person I could count on is myself, was literally unimaginable to me. So
Mhm.
for many, many years in recovery, I worked the steps in a half-assed kind of way
Mhm.
without an anchoring in a faith or power greater than myself. And honestly, I didn't see a need until I did. And I'm one
Mhm.
of the lucky ones that didn't die in those first 5 years running on willpower. And I believe that in part, one of the reasons I didn't was because my first sponsor, who I loved and cherished and trusted and believed when I didn't believe anybody else, who had 22 years sober from heroin addiction, ended up relapsing and killing himself
Mhm.
at the end of year one, at which
Mhm.
point I knew that if I relapsed, I was going to die.
Mhm.
And rock bottom for me was not my cocaine overdose, which spooked me and got me into my very first 12-step meeting, to which I did not return for a year and a half. But rock bottom was spiritual in nature. And it was a place where this desire to control the people, places, and things around me stopped working. And I think rock bottom is not just unique to the individual, it's a place where you don't want to die, hopefully, and you can no longer go on living the way you're living.
Mhm.
And in that moment, there is the gift of desperation.
Mhm.
And there's a window of opportunity where we can change. We're primed for a new experience. And a woman had come into my life who was in multiple 12-step programs. And that's when she said, why don't we do the steps on your marriage? Because it was a marital crisis that was taking me to my knees and making me insane and pushing me closer to a relapse. And so we did. And it was a life-changing experience. And I've been using those 12 steps and the framework in that way for the last 11 years. So much so that I wrote a book about it.
Right. Wow. Wow. Well, there's so much to dissect here because I'm always fascinated. I chose the route of prevention as a way to address, the mental health crisis and the drug overdose crisis that's been ravaging the country now for, going on 3 decades. And I think that I chose the prevention route to make a difference because I always believed in, if you never go down that road, that it's easier to prevent somebody, from succumbing to drug addiction. I always thought it was incredibly more difficult for people who have experienced addiction to then, be able to overcome it. And when I speak to people who are able to do that, first of all, obviously, congratulations on, long, healthy sobriety, coming through on your end. But I'm fascinated at their approach. And I know AA and I know the 12 steps and I know, certain programs work for certain people. And then you hear about relapses and things like, like you said, your original sponsor. So could you maybe take us through that thought process for you? At some point, you realized that the drug addiction was going to cost you your life or you were going to go down a road you didn't want to go down. So maybe not the second time when you came to this, realization that it was time to, change your approach. At what point did you figure out before this that it was time to change your life?
On the day I got accepted into a doctoral program for physical therapy, I overdosed on cocaine.
Wow.
So that was the level at which I was functioning.
Mhm.
And that scared the shit out of me,
Mhm.
as you can imagine. So I
Mhm.
ended up calling that man, Bobby, who became my sponsor almost 2 years after, because he was the only person I could confess that to, who I knew wouldn't judge me. And so he introduced me to the 12 step rooms because he took me to a meeting, but I was so far away from the kind of rock bottom I just described that I was like, absolutely not. This
Mhm.
is not for me.
Mhm.
And even if I have a cocaine problem, I don't have a life problem. Thank you very much.
Mhm.
And fast forward a year and a half, when the guy I was dating found a prescription pill bottle in a shared sock drawer that we had, held it up and looked at me with such disdain. And this was a person that I loved very dearly, who I was with from the time before my addiction took off, who I had cheated on and lied to more times than I could count. The look in his eyes let me know. And he said, "You're still fucking doing this shit?" Because my father was the enabler in our family dynamic. And he would drive prescription drugs that were not prescribed to either me or him into the city whenever I needed them. And there they were in this sock drawer. And now I was caught. And I knew by the look in his eye that he was going to leave me. And he was my higher power. He was the only proof I had that I was worth anything at all. So then I went back to a meeting, called the guy Bobby again, and was like, uh-oh. And for whatever reason, though I was smoking weed for many, many of those early days until I realized that doesn't count as being sober in the land of, you know, old school hardcore sobriety. Uh, that was when I sat in the back of the rooms with my arms crossed, but I stayed.
Mhm.
And about 30 days into that, and me leaning over to Bobby and going, "So this whole thing about the neck up, not putting mind altering substances in your body from the neck up, did that also mean weed?" And he was like, "Yeah, kid, let's just pick a random day." So we picked the very last day of February. Well, depending on if it's leap year or not, February 28th of 2009, right? And so now I'm a person who came into the 12 step rooms. This is my first introduction to anything spiritual whatsoever, but it sounded religious to me, not spiritual. And so I hated it because I grew up in a house where if you believe in God, you're a fucking idiot. And if you have any intellect at all, you know that that shit is for the birds and it's not real.
Mhm.
So really, I'm running on my own ability to navigate the world, which was not very good. And
Mhm.
the thing about perfectionism is that culturally, it allows you to accomplish so very much
Mhm.
that we are taught is important. You know, if I study hard enough, I'll get into the program. If I work hard enough in the program, I'll graduate and get my degree. And then if I take my boards, I'll pass. And then I apply for the job and I get the job. And if I save enough money, I can put a down payment on a house. And if I'm pretty enough, I'll get the boyfriend and we can get married and have the kid. What perfectionism doesn't teach you, and where it completely falls apart, is with matters of the heart. And the 12 step program was trying to teach me a way to navigate things like fear, uncertainty,
Mhm.
resentment, betrayal, and grief. But I didn't see it that way
Mhm.
because the language was very old and very patriarchal, and it sounded very religious. And had it not been for this woman saying to me in this marital crisis, "What if we do the steps on your marriage?" To which I challenged and said, "What do you mean? What would that sound like?" I don't know if I would have ever found my way forward. I hope
Mhm.
so. But
Mhm.
in my case, you know, my spiritual life began when I said, "Oh, wait a minute. I already know I'm powerless over drugs and alcohol. So now if I reframe it, I'm powerless over my husband.
Mhm.
I'm powerless over the fact that I cheated on him before we got married and that he's still angry. and we didn't heal and go to therapy and clear all this out before we got married, I'm powerless over whether or not he's cheating on me now, because it sure seems like he is, but he's denying that he is. I'm powerless over the future of this relationship. And when I try to exert power over him, my life becomes unmanageable in the following ways. I feel like shit. I have no access to peace or real power. My worthiness is completely contingent on what he does or doesn't do, what he says or doesn't say. And so then what do I have power over? So we really started to unpack the 12-step framework in this way, in a way that was more modern, in a way that I now understand was more trauma informed. And one of the biggest aha moments in this process, and it's in my book, and when I coach people today, this is almost an essential starting point, is when we got to the 9th step, which is making an amends. And I had made so many. I was 5 years sober. And she said, have you ever made an amends to yourself?
No.
And I hadn't.
Right.
Not only had I not been guided to do that in the rooms, I hadn't been asked to do that ever in my life.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And at the very root of an addictive process is a lack of worthiness and a giant sense of shame.
Mm-hmm.
And not just shame over what you did in your addiction and who you hurt, but very likely shame that stems from childhood and
Mm-hmm.
needs that weren't met and ways in which you weren't seen and loved
Mm-hmm.
in your formative years that you really needed to be seen and loved. Why does that matter? Well, if you take that reality and you dump that person into a 12-step room, and now it's all about what you did in your addiction, and that you're an addict, and that without God, you're not going to get better, and your own ideas are not good and not smart, and you need to apologize with discernment to the people you've hurt, without the underbelly of all of that has truth to it. And we must take radical accountability for our healing and our progress. But we must forgive ourselves. We must have a vehicle to clear away the guilt, regret, and shame that has been haunting us, that we have been anesthetizing for decades. Because without that, we cannot see anything clearly. And I was a person 5 years sober who was spiritually bankrupt, who was running off of self-ridicule, who could not trust her knowing, the voice that was going, this marriage isn't adding up. It doesn't make sense. Because it was overridden by a voice that said, this is what you fucking get for what you did. And once I had permission to go, wait a minute, I might have done awful things to this man, but that doesn't mean I deserve an awful marriage. And if I'm not a bad person who made bad choices, if I'm a good person who made some bad choices, who deserves a deeply fulfilling marriage, then how would I speak to myself instead? And what might I dream up for my life?
Mm-hmm.
And all of a sudden, now, this is not a white light experience, by the way, for the people listening, right? Because this is just a start. My pain was a circuit breaker, and it took me into a new state of consciousness saying, I can't go on living the way I'm living. I need a new way to live. The step work was introduced in this new way. I realized that I'm beating myself to a pulp day in and day out. And now someone says, you can forgive yourself, right? Cool. Now what? Now what that means is every single time I hear myself speaking negatively, I have to go, ooh, there it is again. There's that shame voice. Hey, I know why you're here. I'm not going to try and suppress you. I'm not going to try and run from you. But I am going to show up and say, your work here is done, at least for today or for now. And I'm someone who actually wants to love themselves through their mistakes and have a really big, beautiful life. And so, and then I needed to come up with what that was
Mhm.
and double down on
Mhm.
practicing saying it again and again and again.
Right.
And that was the beginning of me hearing the whisper of my intuition, which has
So
been my life route.
do you think that the void that was your, I guess you said your childhood, right? Things you experienced growing up, that eventually would, lead you to drug use. The filling of the void, the first thing you had to do was forgive yourself, and give yourself the opportunity to, whether it's self-worth or something that made you feel good about yourself, but you're also battling yourself to find that. When you get that aha moment, is it transformative immediately, or does it take you along? Because you said after the 5 years, it wasn't like it wasn't an easy transformation to come to this conclusion, but you were able to do it. Take us through that process.
Yeah, it's really tricky, even when we're in behavioral patterns that aren't good for us. So long as we're still getting something out of them, we might keep doing them. And I was at a place
Mhm.
where behaving in these ways of, today I'm going to say or do just the right thing to make my husband forgive me. Today's going to be the day. When all of that was full stop, and I was like, I can't, none of this works. I cannot do this.
Mhm.
Then the real work actually began, because now I have this feedback loop I've been living on for decades that just stopped, that I
Mhm.
wasn't willing to give energy to or continue to practice to reinforce. But there was nothing new formed. I mean, on a
Mhm.
science level, we want to talk about circuitry and what it actually takes to rewire
Mhm.
a pattern. It's rigorous practice. So then the beginning of this was the most disgusting, uncomfortable time, arguably, in my life, or one of the hardest times in my sobriety. There's been some real serious uh, face down in the mud pits of despair that happened after that. But in this case, I'd wake up every day knowing I couldn't go back to controlling everything. I felt extremely depressed. I was hyper aware of
Mhm.
my critical voice. And I knew I wanted to shift the language to something more compassionate. And I was trying to practice that. But there were days and weeks and months where it just fucking sucked. And here's where the shift started to happen. Because I understood the critical voice. I understood her role in my life. I understood that she was trying to protect me for so long and that now she was literally killing my spirit. Every time she showed up, I could say, I know why I get it, but, capital S Samantha, sober Samantha, Samantha that wants to love herself through her mistakes is here too. And she's actually the adult in this situation. And she wants you to know that we're all going to be all right. And the kinder way to say that thing was, wow, your body looks really strong. And even though you want to be 5 pounds thinner, like, you're doing everything you need to do. Or, your marriage is a mess right now and you don't know the outcome. And that is so scary, but no matter what, you're going to land on your feet.
Mhm.
So I had to have my highest self start to show up. And all of a sudden, when that critical voice didn't have the megaphone in the boardroom anymore, my intuitive voice started to show up. So how did I know? And then why does that matter? Well, she sounded totally different than the critical voice. And I say it always has still to this day, the quality of the four C's. So my intuitive voice is clear, calm, curious, and compassionate. So she, for example, I'm living in this apartment in my separation from my husband, which was so scary because I had spent months and months couch surfing, hoping that we would be okay enough that I could come back home. And
Mhm.
finally, we were not. And my girlfriend was like, this is insane. You need to get an apartment, which to me was like a death sentence. Like, if I sign a lease while I'm a married woman, my marriage is over and I
Right.
failed and it's all
Mhm.
my fault. But here I
Mhm.
am signing a lease and I'm in this unfurnished apartment, right? So I'm doing all this deep work. And sometimes my intuition would say, because I had to go buy furniture for the first time in my life, oh, that color teal. Yeah, that color's so good. That color feels like me. And I'm like, I had already been married. We had already picked out the flowers and all the colors for our wedding. And I remember my husband asking me, what flowers do you want? And I'm thinking, I don't fucking know. I don't know what my favorite color is. I don't know anything about whatever you want. I'm the bad girl. I can't believe you're gonna marry me. I fucking hurt you so badly. Like
Wow.
you. And so literally, sometimes the simplest thing, like what color makes me feel joyful, was a direction from my intuition. Now,
Mhm.
on a much larger, deeper level, how did it show up? One of the early nights of living in this apartment, I did not have furniture yet. I had a mattress on the floor and I was in a loft apartment with 16-foot ceilings. Laid back on the mattress, looked up at the ceiling and was sobbing. Because it was the first night of a 6-month lease in an endless sea of marital dysfunction with no end in sight. And I'm just thinking, what the fuck am I going to do now? And when I was growing up, my mom would stroke my hair to help me fall asleep. And then it was drugs and alcohol that would help me fall asleep. And then it was mixed with that, the boyfriend who was now my husband, who would stroke my head. And I'm thinking, you don't even know how to fucking soothe yourself to sleep. So there's my critical voice, just having a good old time with me. And all of a sudden, a different voice said, you're going to have to wrap your arms around yourself and hug yourself until you fall asleep.
Yeah.
And I was like, excuse me? I mean, this was the early days of starting to arrest that critical voice or at least interrupt it. But that is one of the most loving ways that my intuition showed up. And sure enough, I did.
Mhm.
I will never
Mhm.
forget that moment in my life. It was such a breakthrough. It was the most awkward, uncomfortable thing. I turned onto my side. I hugged myself. I was sobbing. And eventually I fell asleep because I literally had no idea what else to do. So until I did the step work in this way, I had no peace of mind. I had no clarity. I had no internal compass guiding me toward my best and highest self. And it is not just the framework by which I live. I believe it is a life raft. And, eventually I did get a doctorate in physical therapy and had a bustling practice for 10 years in Santa Monica. And all the patients coming to see me, because it was cash based, they weren't addicts. They were well off, high net worth, aging athletes who just wanted their bodies to stop hurting. And it was this wonderfully fulfilling business until it wasn't.
Mhm.
And I kept noticing that here I was living this spiritual life, going to meetings, using this 12-step framework and all the different parts of my life that were causing me pain. So when it was time to get pregnant and miscarrying, we used the steps on that. When it was the loss of my father, we used the steps on that. And I'm watching these patients come in and they're not addicts, but they're suffering from chronic people pleasing, perfectionism, obsession with productivity, obsession with the beauty and body standard. And this stuff is not just getting in the way of their physical pain going away, but getting in the way of their happiness.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm thinking, God damn it, you and I are not so different.
Yeah. Wow.
And my book really became a calling card to say, everyone inside the rooms says the 12 steps are like the best kept secret that we get after surviving this horrific shipwreck, this design for living, and no one else does.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, well, I'm going to be the one
Mm-hmm.
to bring it to everyone, but it has to be current with what we now know in 2025 about childhood trauma, addiction, and psychology, because it's not current. And how many more lives can we save and impact if we did that?
See, I love that because again, part of what we're trying to do here is bring that aspect to life. Real quick, so I had written in my book, which is I'm only mentioning it because it's about to be published, but I kind of tell my story where it's a lot different than yours. Obviously, addiction wasn't an issue, and mental health wasn't an issue until it was. Until I had gotten married, we bought a house, 2 kids in 16 months. Construction to the house. It was a very stressful time quickly, and my head was basically on fire for a couple of years, and I finally came to the realization, with the help of my wife, that I needed help, to kind of figure it all out. A couple of years of therapy, and I was back on my feet, without any major hiccups. But it took a lot of work to get there, and I'm bringing that up because you're telling your story through your journey and staying sober through, even in the middle of your sobriety, to be able to stay sober with the adversity and the things you were experiencing, and then bringing it to the next step where you want to bring your experience into the 21st century and tell people and help people, because I mean, is it step 12 where it's now you have to pass it on to bringing your experience to help others? Yeah. So take us through that process, because I mean, between a PhD, which you had prior, right? But now you're writing books, you're doing a podcast, you're doing a lot of things in this space. What does that bring, Samantha, to the place where she needs to be every day? Tell us about that.
On March 13th of 2022, I was in the Austin, Texas airport with my husband. We had spent a weekend away for the first time since having kids. And by the way, it's the same guy that I was separated from.
Wow, that's great.
And
That's awesome.
he was having an affair. And I thought it was over for sure when I found that out. And turns out my intuition was nudging me to consider that maybe it wasn't.
Mhm.
And we've been back together, happily married with 2 children for the last 10 years. It's a real unbelievable testament to two people who love each other, who
That's
are
awesome.
committed to doing the work.
Hmm.
So we were on this weekend away after having kids, looking for potentially a second home to buy, which was so exciting because we grew up poor and we were so poor in LA for a while, starting businesses, and we were kind of getting our feet underneath us. Got a starter home, flipped it, bought a nicer home, and then actually had enough money to start considering an investment property. And as we were waiting in the airport to head back to LA, I started getting incessant text messages with a New Jersey area code. And I thought it was spam. And then I got really nervous because my sister lived in New Jersey and my sister had been suffering from addiction for a decade while I was in recovery. And as soon as I texted and found out who it was, I knew that it was about my sister. And my absolute worst fears came true. She died of a drug overdose.
I'm sorry.
I don't remember anything other than these two things on that day. I dropped to the floor and wailed in the airport like a dying animal. And I remember coming home, packing a bag, telling my children, mommy has to go on a trip to the East Coast tomorrow, but she's very, very sad when they were trying to ask me what was wrong. Other than that, I don't know what happened, but my husband said that I turned to him on the flight and I said, I'm writing a fucking book. A lot of us want to write a book. All of us have a book in us. I had always felt like one day I might, but what's
Mhm.
going to be the thing,
Mhm.
the catalyst that goes now? You have to do it now.
Mhm.
That was it for me.
Mhm.
And I spent 2 years writing and crying and writing and confronting and getting clearer that this is not just going to be the hardest stories of my life and how I've overcome them, though that is in there too. But that the clinician in me that kept seeing the soul sickness in the patient had to make this book prescriptive. And if I'm trying to help as many people as possible, then I need to get honest about what helped me, which was when I worked those steps in a more
Right.
modern way, right? And
Right.
so therein was born the structure of my memoir
Mhm.
in 12 chapters, each one corresponding to one of the steps. I write the actual language as it is traditionally stated. And then I say, don't shut the book. I know if you're anything like me, this sounds religious, this sounds archaic, this sounds patriarchal, but stay with me. Because I promise you, if we can extract the universal message in this step and make it applicable to your life, it will transform how you live, love, parent, and work.
Mhm. Mhm.
And so that's what I did. And every chapter now became this calling card where what is powerlessness and unmanageability to the non-addict? What does that mean? What does that mean in the context of you're on your way to a very important meeting and you're usually early and now there's a traffic jam and you want to blow your fucking brains out and you're flipping people off and you're fit of rage and you're super stressed. Well, I would call that powerlessness and unmanageability.
Mhm.
How do you use step one in that moment? And then if you're faced with something as awful as I was and you lose a loved one, what is powerlessness and unmanageability in that context?
Mhm.
And what the hell are you doing to gain access to real power and real peace
Mhm.
when life throws you a curveball that big?
Right.
And so every chapter was written with the intention to give people a spiritual blueprint for
Mhm.
how to get through their hardest things. And so, little did I know that the death of my sister would literally give me the purpose of my life. I
Mhm.
didn't know as I was writing the book that this book was not just a memoir and honestly, not just a mission, that it's a movement.
Mhm.
I didn't know that, but
Mhm.
I know that now. And
Right.
everything I do, whether it's speaking on a podcast, speaking on a stage, coaching people, is under the umbrella that we must become spiritually fit first. So I could be talking to a bunch of entrepreneurs and the bomb that I will drop at the end, because I can talk about running a private practice and how I did it and the ingredients to success, because those people care about the bottom line and the dollar. But you better believe at the end of the talk, I'm going to say to them, if you want to be a financial mogul, become a spiritual billionaire first.
Mhm.
My
Wow.
message is forever and always going to be that,
Yeah.
because my sister's not the only addict in my family. And I've watched every person that I love in my immediate family either die a horrible, untimely death like she did, or a slow spiritual death, stuck under the weight of pleasing and performing an
Harte.
unhealthy codependency,
Right.
and no money in the world
Mm.
can cure any of that.
So true. That's so true. I love it. I think that just your spiritual strength, I can feel it coming through the screen here. No, I'm serious, and I feel like to give you the opportunity to give people who are suffering, give people who have this affliction, this addiction, problem in their lives. If you're going to give them the first piece of advice, that helped you, whether it's in the beginning, middle, or where you are today, if you can give them one thing to hold on to, what would it be?
I have to talk about the amends process. And here's the practical piece of advice, because there's nobody listening who speaks to themselves with hatred, who's
Mhm.
all of a sudden going to hear me and go, oh, okay, cool. I'll forgive myself
Mhm.
and be cured.
Right.
That's not how it works.
Mhm.
But if the practice that you can get into is as simple as this, ready? Let's say I just made a mistake doing anything. It does not matter, big or small. And the immediate voice in my head goes, why the fuck did you just do that? You're a fucking idiot.
Mhm.
Number one, dial up your awareness on how you're speaking to yourself. And then when you hear
Mhm.
that voice show up, you shift it to this instead. Why did I just do that? Why did I just do that? Oh my God, I'm exhausted. I didn't get enough sleep. And I'm short tempered, I'm irritable. Or why did I just do? Oh, because I've been saying yes to a million things all day long
Mhm.
instead of saying no when I
Mhm.
actually don't have the energy or the capacity. And if you don't know the answer, it doesn't matter. You don't, I'm very self-aware. I've done decades of work. I get it. That takes time. I've also been in a ton of therapy, to your point. Just the shift from self-loathing and criticism to compassion, a compassionate self-inquiry is one of the greatest gifts you can start giving to yourself. Because instead of the narrow frame of now you're a piece of shit and what you did was either right or wrong, black or white, you're shifting the lens to go, huh, that's it. That's enough. Because you just broke down all the walls on what you thought was
Mhm.
true,
Right.
what you thought you knew. And you're going, do I? Do I know why I did that?
Mhm.
Huh. And all of a sudden, 1,000 other things become possible.
Wow. Now, if I can piggyback on that just for a moment and get your take on this. So I also talk about this in my book about. So again, drugs and addiction were, for the most part, I was able to skate the serious stuff. But to this day, I'm still addicted to nicotine. I quit smoking cigarettes, 14 years ago. But I have to do something every day to, satisfy that itch that doesn't involve smoking cigarettes. And sometimes I can get a little crazy with the gambling. Um, there are times where the compulsiveness or even the obsessiveness about it sneaks up on me, and there are times along the way where I'll make that mistake, where I'll go a little overboard with it, and the next morning be like, fuck, what did I do? I'm so pissed off at myself. I know that it's my weakness, and there are times it's just hard for me to hone it in where it's not a problem. It's less and less now, but I think as a younger man, there were times where and I would just beat myself up over it. I'm able to now bring that self compassion that I learned in therapy. Right? It's okay. You're human. Things happen. As long as you can forgive yourself and move on instead of ruminating about it, that's what's going to help you get through that initial hump. And I feel like your message resonates with that fully because you by just you telling me that I thought back in my mind, even recently, where I was like the next day, I was like, you went a little too much with it last night. And it's not like not all the time, but there, like there's a couple casinos here on Long Island that sometimes we'll go to, and I shouldn't spend as much money as I have doing the things that they offer there. But for me, the self-compassion is what gets me through that initial shit, like I fucked up. I'm able to get over it and not do it to a point where it's problematic anymore. And I think that's a big piece to it, Samantha. I really do.
Yeah, and there's a couple things I want to say to that. So there's this psychologist that's sometimes called the parenting whisperer. And now that I have two kids, I have read a lot of parenting books. And one thing she says that I love, and I'm gonna pull it out and drop it into what you and I are saying right now. She says with children, if you could validate their feelings and embody your authority, that is a beautiful place to be, right? Because we know sort of the 50s and 60s style parenting where, shut the fuck up, boys don't cry, right?
Yep.
And so that's not validating anybody's feelings, and that is not healthy. And
Right.
then there's the helicopter parenting of like never wanting your kids to be sad ever.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
you're not really embodying your authority. You're not really teaching them about resilience, right? So if we take that framework and we drop it here into what we're talking about, I think there's sort of sometimes there's contention around like, but you're a fucking, you have these destructive behaviors. And if you're like, it's okay that you did that. No, let's be extremely clear right now. We are straddling the tension as people who are on a journey to recovery of their highest self,
Mhm.
of both being compassionate and radically accountable.
Mhm.
Both of them belong at a seat in the table. So,
Mhm.
yes, spending time beating yourself up and ruminating is a fool's error. It is obsessive. It is deeply self-centered. You cannot serve anybody when you're in that space. You are literally hurting your spirit. So a compassionate view of the scenario is 1,000 times more useful to yourself and to everyone else. And if that's all you ever did and you kept behaving the same way, it's an empty vortex and you don't move the needle of your life forward and you don't actually heal and grow. So compassionate inquiry, compassionate self-talk coupled with accountability, not just an I'm sorry to self or I'm sorry to you person I hurt, but I am really going to try and amend. To amend is to change, amend
Mhm.
this behavior, this character trait moving forward to the best of my ability. And I will not always do it perfectly, but I will try.
Right. Right. I love
Like
it.
both must be true. And the other part that I want to say, right, and this is a little complicated, but lately I have been putting a spotlight on my relationship with money. In all the years I've been sober, in all the work that I've done, never ever have I done a deep dive on my relationship to finance.
Mhm.
I don't think I've been ready,
Mhm.
quite frankly. There's been so much shit to unpack prior to this that's been more dire, and now it is time.
Mhm.
What do I mean by that? Well, in the wake of my sister dying and our finances being way more secure, not only was it so scary for me to sublease my practice, by the way, I gave my space to someone else. I turned to my husband and I said, if you can support me right now, I've got nothing to give, nothing.
Mhm.
And so the business that was born out of the marital crisis, I turned over, hit the pause button, gave up my practice, and let my husband financially support me. But not just support me. In between bouts of writing and crying, I was spending, I was having the best fucking time of my life because I thought, yes, like I fucking need this right now.
Mhm.
And compared to going and getting an 8 ball of cocaine, this ain't shit,
Right.
right? And eventually, a year or so into that, we sat down and he's like, where is all this money going? And all of a sudden, my feet are fucking back on the ground going, hold on. This relationship you have with money is not very healthy. And it's hurting your husband, which is ultimately hurting you and your
Mhm.
children and your family and your wealth that you're trying to build, that you're so
Mhm.
consciously sure you
Mhm.
want to do something about.
Right.
So now I've been unpacking. Fuck, man, if I look at money as a relationship, I've been in a very abusive one because what I
Mhm.
learned about money was it's fleeting.
Mhm.
And even if it shows up, it's going to go away.
Mhm.
So when it's here, spend it. Do whatever the fuck you want to do with it. Now, as I've been unpacking, okay, so there's limiting beliefs and competing beliefs. Limiting beliefs are about worthiness, and I don't have worthiness issues around money. I am clear as fuck that I am worthy of financial abundance.
Mhm.
Great. What about competing beliefs? Well, I have this conscious belief that I should be a huge, significant earner in my house, and now I'm back out working, I'm coaching, I'm speaking on stages, and you know, and the money's not, well, through last year money hasn't been rolling in, flowing in like I thought it should, and I'm sitting here like, what is going on? And through some really powerful coaching, I've been unpacking some belief systems that directly compete with the conscious one that I should have lots of money. Well, if I believe money goes away, why would it show up?
Mhm.
Or whenever it does show up, why would it stay?
Mhm.
So what's at the root of this thing that it's fleeting? What's the underbelly of this issue? Oh, well, what I recently uncovered was, haven't I suffered enough? Don't I deserve to spend this money? I lost my fucking sister. So what if I want to spend frivolously?
Mhm. Yeah.
Now, there might be some merit to that in the short term, but what's it doing to my long-term healing, my long-term relationship with money, my long-term desire to build wealth and change the generational trajectory for my children?
Mhm.
It's hurting all of
Right.
those things,
Mhm.
right? So there's a level now of rigorous honesty and spiritual work that I'm doing around my relationship to finance.
Wow.
And that's just part of the deal.
Right.
And so now that I've been woken up to this level of consciousness around how I've been treating money and how it's affecting my family, what am I going to do about it? Well, I'm not going to beat myself up, but if I'm ready, I'm going to take some radical accountability. You know what I'm doing? This is the level to which I'm working on this. Not only am I saying prayers and mantras out loud daily that are very specific, God, universe, whoever you are, intuition, please help me respect and receive the money that is destined for me.
Oh, and that's working.
And if I find a quarter, which normally I'd be like, ugh, I would find change in my purse and fucking throw it out. Like, 'cause it was dirty. And I'm just like, oh,
Uh-huh.
it's just
It's only
change.
change. Yeah, right. Exactly.
Thank you.
Right.
Thank you for this quarter.
Wow.
Thank you for this $5 bill.
So the gratitude.
Noticing the gifts everywhere.
Hmm. That's so true.
Right. And so it's so important to understand that, first of all, how boring would life be? I mean, we all think it would be dandy if we didn't have shit to work on. But seriously, if we had nothing to work on, what
Sucks.
are we doing? What are we doing here? Right. And so we
Agreed.
don't ever
Yeah.
graduate from our spiritual curriculum here on earth.
Hmm.
That's why they say in recovery, you're peeling back layers of the onion. You really are.
Right. Yeah.
I'm
Wow.
42 years old and I'm just now reconciling my relationship to money.
Well,
Guess what?
better now than
Now I'm
never.
ready. Now
Yeah.
I'm
Yeah.
I was
Totally.
I was dealing with too many other really hard things
Mhm.
that were more urgent.
Right.
And
Right.
now I'm
Yeah.
ready. And now I'm willing to do the work.
Uh, I think that's great. That's so great. So, Samantha, as we wrap up here, I want to give you the opportunity to tell everybody about your book, tell everybody about your podcast. I know that we had a nice conversation here about your experience, but talk about what you're doing now to bring this message to the masses.
Mm. Yeah. So if you guys go on my website, it just got redone. I'm really excited about it. It's drsamanthaharte.com. You can click on podcast. You can click on book. You can click on coaching. You can click on programs. All these things I've designed, both as a doctor of physical therapy and now as a personal growth coach with all this time sober. They live on the website. They are available for purchase. And honestly, the call to action on all the places on my website is to book a discovery call. I love connecting with other people who hear me talk and feel like I woke something up inside of them.
Yep. Yeah.
And my podcast is no different. It's called The Truth About Addiction. And I don't just talk to people who have substance abuse issues. I talk to people who struggle with emotional cycles of addiction and dysfunction, like I described that I saw in my clinic for all those
Mhm.
years, because I really want to widen the lens on how we think about these things and how we tackle them. And the two things that I really love doing the most right now are speaking, whether it's on a podcast or a big stage. I have a monthly event in LA that I started called Heart Conscious Creators, and it's for anybody consciously creating their destiny. And every month we take one of the steps that corresponds to that month, right? So we're in April, which corresponds to the fourth step, because it's the fourth
Right.
month. We extract the universal principle, and I have different speakers that I interview, and we talk about how this principle helps us navigate business, family, relationships, body image. And that's an amazing project and a way for me to sort of regularly bring this to the world and the
Mhm.
masses, and also coaching people.
Mhm.
It took me so long to re-identify what it is I'm offering, because for a long time it was just I'm a PT and I don't train with your trainer, train with your doctor, right? I was always doing functional fitness and movement pattern correction. And when I phrased it like that, people were like, oh my God, I could actually train with you. That makes so much more sense than a trainer. And, creating a new version of that pitch that also reflects how I help treat the spirit has been tricky.
Yeah.
But when I coach people now, we're not just coaching you out of a pain-free body, we're coaching you into a purpose-driven life.
Mhm. Mhm.
So it's a much more holistic and integrative approach to healing. So when I get to work one-on-one with somebody, it's so special to me. It's life-changing. And so, every day the acronym is HOPE, help one person every day. So anything I can do, anything I can say to give somebody a glimmer in the dark is the mission.
Wow. I love it. Samantha Hart, thank you so much for your time today. I feel like I can talk to you for another hour here. Well, I mean, I just love what you're doing. I love the message. I think that people, that, it will resonate with people. You're doing such amazing work. I love the acronym HOPE. I mean, between being a teacher and with Prep National and Long Island Prep, that's exactly how we feel. Just one person, get one person straightened out in some way or another spiritually, or, otherwise is so super important. So congratulations on your sobriety, on your success, on your mission forward. And if we can be of assistance in any way, we're going to let our listeners know about your website and your speaking engagements. You and I will talk off the air. We'll figure out a way to help each other out.
Amazing. Thank you.
All right. You're very welcome. Thank you, Samantha. Dr. Samantha Hart, once again. And of course, thank you to all of our listeners here on the Mission Z Empowering Change podcast, sponsored by Long Island Prep and Prep National. If you're a parent or professional in your community or an educator in your town, you can visit our website, longislandprep.org or prepnational.com. Learn more about our 3 pillars of action for drug abuse prevention and mental health awareness. And we'll see you next time on the Mission Z Empowering Change podcast. Thank you.